Dr. Icarus Nettle always knew space was a bitch, but floating in front of a derelict alien dreadnought the size of a small moon, he realized she was also a bit of a tease. The ship was eerily still, like a drunk passed out in a cosmic alleyway. Its hulking mass was a testament, not the flowery kind, mind you, to the fact that even in space, things just fall apart. "You think it's dead?" piped up Juno, the team's tech genius who'd probably married her first computer. She was fiddling with her wristpad, trying to hack into the ship systems, or maybe just updating her social media. Hard to tell with Juno. "If it wasn't dead before," Icarus replied, squinting at the looming shadow, "it's certainly dead now that we've shown up." He motioned for the rest of the team to follow him into the belly of the beast. The airlock creaked open with the enthusiasm of a teenager asked to do chores. Inside, the corridors were dimly lit, the kind of lighting that screamed we don't pay our bills. Their boots clanged against the metal floor, echoing like the universe's worst jazz performance. Icarus, ever the optimist, had chosen this career path thinking he'd be unearthing ancient wonders. Instead, he mostly unearthed ancient space dust and the occasional alien fungus that tried to eat his face. "So what's the deal with this place?" asked Lars, the team's muscle. He was built like a vending machine and about as smart as one too, but handy when you needed something smashed. "Why's it just floating out here like it's waiting for a bus?" Icarus shrugged. Maybe it took a wrong turn at the last black hole. The team ventured deeper into the ship. It was a maze of corridors and chambers, each one more disappointing than the last. Rust and decay were the ship's interior decorators, and they had clearly gone for a post-apocalyptic chic look. "Hey, check this out," Juno called, her voice echoing down the hall as she pointed at a wall covered with strange symbols. "Looks like alien graffiti." Icarus inspected the etchings, his eyes narrowing. "Peace treaty," he muttered, his brain working overtime to decipher the alien script. This ship was part of some ancient armistice. "A peace treaty, huh?" Lars mused, cracking his knuckles. "Guess they didn't get the memo about peace not being profitable," Juno snorted. "Or maybe they just sucked at drawing up contracts." Icarus nodded, tracing his fingers along the symbols. "It mentions two factions, something about an eternal ceasefire in the vastness. Yada yada, standard alien bureaucratic nonsense. But why's it here on a warship?" "Maybe it was a decoy," Juno suggested. "You know, here's our peace treaty, just kidding, zap zap." Icarus chuckled. Wouldn't be the first time someone pulled a fast one in the name of peace. They moved on, the mystery of the treaty gnawing at Icarus's mind like a kid on Halloween candy. The ship was a riddle wrapped in an enigma and then wrapped again in a layer of confusion, like a badly packed burrito. In the next chamber, they found what appeared to be the ship's command center. It was as dead as the rest of the place, consoles covered in dust, screens blank. Lars poked at control panel, which responded with a shower of sparks. "Looks like the warranty expired a few millennia ago," he grunted. Juno, ever the optimist, if optimism meant being perpetually sarcastic, tried her hand at the controls. "Let's see if I can get this bucket of bolts to tell us its secrets." Icarus watched as she worked her magic, fingers flying over the keys. The screens flickered to life, displaying a garbled mess of alien language and static. "Well, that's helpful," Icarus said, rubbing his temples. "It's like trying to read the menu at a restaurant run by dyslexic aliens." Juno didn't look up. "Give me a sec, I'll decipher this gibberish." Lars leaned back, folding his arms. "Hope it's got a good story, maybe something about a forbidden love affair between alien factions." "You'd like that," Icarus said dryly. "But this isn't a soap opera, Lars." Juno finally managed to unscramble some of the data. "Here we go. Looks like there was a standoff. Two fleets facing off and this ship was smack in the middle." "Sounds like a bad spot for a picnic," Lars remarked. "No picnic," Juno replied, her eyes scanning the data. "More like a staring contest, and this ship blinked first." Icarus absorbed the information, his mind racing. "So they etched the treaty on the walls as a reminder of what?" "Their failure, Their hopes. Lars shook his head. Maybe just a really dramatic way to leave a note. The lights flickered, casting eerie shadows that danced across the walls like ghosts of a forgotten past. Ikaris felt a shiver run down his spine, the thrill of discovery mixed with the unsettling sense of being watched by the echoes of history. Let's grab what we can and get the hell out, Ikaris decided. This place gives me the creeps. As they turned to leave, Juno paused, her gaze fixed on a console flickering to life. Hold up, I've got something. Please tell me it's the ship's playlist, Lars quipped, because I could use some tunes right about now. Juno ignored him, her attention locked on the screen. There's a message here, a warning, I think. Something about not disturbing the peace. No kidding, Ikaris muttered, feeling the tension in the air thickening. Let's not stick around to find out what happens if we do. They retraced their steps, the corridors seeming narrower, the shadows longer. Ikaris couldn't shake the feeling they were leaving more questions than answers behind. But then, wasn't that always the way? As they reached the airlock, Ikaris glanced back at the darkened passageways. Maybe we'll come back, he said, more to himself than anyone else. Juno arched an eyebrow. Oh sure, because revisiting haunted alien dreadnoughts is just what I had on my bucket list. Hey, Lars added with a grin, could be worse. At least we didn't find out what disturbing the peace really means. The airlock closed with a reluctant hiss, and as their shuttle pulled away, Ikaris watched the dreadnought fade into the void. It was just another mystery, another story left untold in the vast, uncaring expanse of space. But for Ikaris Nettle, that was more than enough to keep him coming back. In the silence of the cabin, Juno summed it up perfectly. Spaceman, it's like a really bad date, beautiful, mysterious, but ultimately it just wants to kill you. Ikaris couldn't help but laugh. Yeah, he agreed, and I'm the idiot who keeps coming back for more. With the ship disappearing into the starlit abyss, their adventure felt less like a triumph and more like survival. But that's how it was out here. You took what the universe gave you and tried not to laugh too hard at the cosmic joke playing out in front of you. As they floated away, engines humming their steady tune, Ikaris couldn't shake the feeling that the ancient peace treaty wasn't quite as benevolent as it seemed. But that was a worry for another day. For now, they were alive, kicking, and still had the luxury of griping about it. The universe rolled on, indifferent to the tiny dramas of its inhabitants, and in that indifference lay a comfort. For no matter how grave the mysteries they uncovered, at least they weren't the poor bastards who'd written those doomed treatises. Hey, Lars said, breaking the silence, what are the odds we find another spooky ship next week? Ikaris shrugged. Pretty good knowing our luck, Juno smirked. Hell, at this rate we'll be the ghosts haunting these damn ships. They all shared a laugh, the sound echoing through the shuttle. In space, humor was a precious commodity, right up there with air and caffeine. Ikaris leaned back, closing his eyes. The dreadnought might have been a dead end, but it was their dead end. And in a universe where everything was trying to kill you, sometimes that was the best victory you could hope for. The air inside the shuttle was thick with the kind of silence that only follows a near disaster. It wrapped around the crew like an itchy blanket, full of discomfort and unanswered questions. Dr. Ikaris Nettle, the man with a name as pretentious as a mid-tier restaurant, sat at the helm, his mind still buzzing from their encounter with the derelict dreadnought. Juno, ever the tech enthusiast with the social skills of a malfunctioning AI, was hunched over her wristpad. She might have been reviewing their findings, but Ikaris suspected she was more likely arguing with some forum trolls. Lars, on the other hand, was in the corner, flexing his muscles like an out-of-date action figure, strong but with about as much brains as a malfunctioning safety lock. You know, I can't help but feel like we missed something back there, Ikaris said, breaking the silence with the subtlety of a brick through a window. Like what? Juno asked, not taking her eyes off her wristpad. A cursed alien treasure, a map to the universe's best coffee shop. Huh, if only, Ikaris replied. More like something about that treaty doesn't sit right. Why would they etch it into the walls of a warship? Juno finally looked up. Maybe they ran out of paper, or maybe they really wanted to emphasize their commitment to peace by carving it into the bones of their own death machine. Yeah, nothing screams we come in peace like a dreadnought, Lars added, cracking his knuckles in what he probably thought was a menacing manner. Maybe they were just really into irony, Icarus nodded, leaning back in his seat. It just seems off. Like, why have a treaty on a ship meant for war unless there was some kind of ulterior motive, hidden agendas in alien politics? Juno snorted. Well, that's a twist. Next, you'll tell me they also had a crooked space senator involved. Wouldn't surprise me in the slightest, Icarus said. Nothing about this galaxy ever does. The shuttle's hum was the only response, a constant companion in their voyage through the void. Space travel, despite its grandeur, had a way of reducing everything to the essentials, survival and cynicism. Icarus glanced at Juno's wristpad, the glow casting strange shadows across her face. I've got half a mind to go back, he said, half to himself. Only half, Juno teased. You're getting generous, seriously, Icarus pressed. That place was more than just a floating tomb. It had purpose. And I've got a hunch the purpose wasn't just to waste away. Or maybe that's exactly it, Lars said, turning his muscles into a stretch. Maybe they built the thing just to let it float around and freak out idiots like us. Could be, Icarus admitted. But I've learned not to ignore my gut. Even if it's only right half the time, that's still better odds than most. Your funeral, Juno quipped, though there was a glint of curiosity in her eyes. If you're going back, I'll be there to pull your sorry ass out of the fire. Again. And I'll be there to punch whatever needs punching, Lars added with a grin, proving once more that he was the team's human-shaped hammer. Their plan, or lack of one, agreed upon, they decided to regroup and rest. Tomorrow they would head back to that haunted chunk of metal. Icarus knew it was a risk, but he couldn't shake the feeling that the alien dreadnought held secrets far more valuable than a dusty old treaty. The next day, the three of them stood at the entryway of the dreadnought, the airlock creaking open like the universe's oldest door. The alien corridors greeted them again with their familiar mustiness, a smell that could only be described as historic. Home sweet home, Juno muttered, tapping away at her wristpad, probably trying to hack into the dreadnought's systems for a better layout. I missed this place like I miss space lice. Hey, don't knock it, Lars said. Some of those ships have decent bars. Their banter was like a well-worn routine, comfortable and predictable, which was a comfort in itself when faced with the unknown. Icarus led them deeper into the ship, each step echoing with a hollow clang that seemed to mock their presence. All right, Icarus said, stopping in front of a junction of corridors. We need to figure out what these symbols mean. We know they were part of some peace treaty, but there's got to be more. Juno nodded, her eyes flicking over the etchings. Could be a map, or a warning, or just someone's grocery list. Aliens got to eat too. Lars moved closer, squinting at the symbols as if hoping they'd magically translate themselves. Looks like gibberish to me. That's because it is, Juno replied. But gibberish with a purpose. We just need to figure out whose purpose. Icarus examined the walls, running a hand over the cool metal. The symbols were carved with precise intent, like the work of an artist who'd been forced into engineering. This doesn't feel like a dead end. More like a beginning. With all due respect, Doc, Lars said, the last time you said something was a beginning. We almost got eaten by a space slug, true, but that was a hell of a story, Icarus replied. Besides, it's not like we have anything better to do. They moved onward, deeper into the ship, their steps the only sound in a silence that felt more oppressive the further they went. The gloom enveloped them like a heavy fog, each corridor blending into the next, each chamber a mirror of monotony and decay. Finally, they came upon a room that seemed different from the others. Larger, with consoles lining the walls and a central table that might have once been a holographic projector. The dust was thick, thicker than Lars's skull, Icarus thought with a smirk. Looks like mission control, Juno said, already moving to one of the consoles. If this place has any secrets left, they'll be in here. While Juno worked her magic, Icarus and Lars stood by, trying not to look as useless as they felt. Icarus's mind wandered to the treaty again. What secrets did it hold? And were those secrets worth the danger they danced with every time they set foot in this tomb? A series of beeps from Juno's console brought him back. "Got something," she said, her voice tinged with excitement. "Looks like a log, some kind of record. Please tell me it's got subtitles," Lars quipped, peering over her shoulder. "Better," Juno replied. "It's in a language I can translate, sort of." "Give me a second." They watched as lines of alien script scrolled across the screen, Juno's fingers a blur on the wrist pad. Finally she looked up, eyes shining with the thrill of discovery. "Okay, here's the gist," she said. "This Dreadnought was used as a mediator ship, a neutral ground where two warring factions could meet without blowing each other up." "Sounds reasonable," Icarus said. "So the treaty's legit?" "Not quite," Juno replied. "The peace treaty was a cover. This ship wasn't just a mediator, it was a trap. The idea was to lure both sides in, get them to agree to terms." Then she made a dramatic explosion gesture with her hands. "End of hostilities permanently." "That's dark," Lars said, finally at a loss for words. "Effective, though," Icarus noted, his mind racing with this new information. "No better way to ensure peace than by ensuring there's no one left to fight. Problem is, something went wrong," Juno continued. "The plan backfired and the ship itself got caught in the crossfire. Hence the floating husk. So, a floating lesson on why not to double-cross aliens," Lars said. "Good thing we're not in that business." "Yet," Juno added with a smirk. Icarus chuckled, though the discovery left him uneasy. The Dreadnought's purpose was as much a lesson in hubris as anything else. A reminder that even the best-laid plans were just cosmic jokes waiting to be told. "All right, let's see what else we can find," Icarus said, motioning for them to continue. "If there's more, it's not going to sit around and wait for us to notice." With renewed purpose, they moved on, the darkness of the alien ship now a backdrop to their exploration rather than an obstacle. The corridors seemed less oppressive, the silence less damning. Their final stop was a room that seemed untouched by the chaos that had claimed the rest of the ship. The walls were lined with strange artifacts, each one a testament, not the flowery kind, to the lives that had once passed through here. "Think these are worth anything?" Lars asked, eyeing a particularly shiny object. "Probably not," Juno said, "but they could be the key to understanding what really happened here." Icarus scanned the room, his mind ticking over the possibilities. "Or they could be a nice addition to our trophy wall." Their laughter echoed off the metal walls, a sound that seemed out of place yet strangely fitting. In a universe where everything was trying to kill them, humor was the best armor they had. As they made their way back to the airlock, Icarus mulled over the day's revelations. The Dreadnought had been a mediator, a weapon of peace turned on its creators. In the vast emptiness of space, it was a story as old as time, one he'd seen play out time and again. "Think we'll ever find a ship that's just a ship?" Lars asked, his voice cutting through Icarus's thoughts. "Not likely," Icarus replied. "But that's half the fun, isn't it?" Juno snorted. "You call this fun?" "Sure," Icarus said with a grin. "The kind of fun that might get us killed." The airlock sealed behind them with a soft whoosh, releasing them from the Dreadnought's grip. As they floated away, the stars welcoming them back into the vast, uncaring void, Icarus allowed himself a moment of quiet reflection. "Space, man," Juno said, echoing her earlier sentiment. "It's a hell of a ride." Icarus smiled, watching the Dreadnought shrink into the distance. "Yeah," he agreed, "and I wouldn't trade it for anything." In the silence of their cabin, the universe rolled on, indifferent to the dramas of its tiny inhabitants. And Icarus Nettle, ever the explorer, felt the familiar pull of mystery tugging at his soul once more. The shuttle's engines hummed with a lazy kind of disinterest, as if even the machinery knew heading back to the Dreadnought was a bad idea. But there they were, Icarus, Juno, and Lars, cruising towards the alien hulk again, because if there was one thing they excelled at, it was ignoring good judgment. Back to the scene of the crime, Juno remarked, fiddling with her wristpad as she kept an eye on the external sensors. Technically, Icarus corrected, it's only a crime if we get caught, or if we die doing it, Lars added. They docked with the Dreadnought in an anticlimactic clunk, the airlock opening with the same creaky groan as the day before. They stepped inside, the stale atmosphere greeting them like a musty old librarian. Smells worse than a politician's promise, Lars grumbled, scrunching his nose. Somehow, I think I prefer the old books, Juno replied, eyes already scanning the corridor for anything they'd missed. They meandered through the ship's vast halls, the same oppressive silence settling over them like an uncomfortable blanket. Icarus took point, leading them deeper, and soon they found what they hadn't known they were looking for. A door, inconspicuous and tucked away, somehow missed on their first tour. Looks important, Lars said, scratching the back of his head like the thought hurt. Or it's just a maintenance closet, Juno countered, though her curiosity got the better of her, and she began typing furiously on her wristpad. The door slid open with a hiss, revealing a dimly lit chamber. Unlike the rest of the ship, this room was pristine, untouched by time and whatever disaster had claimed the Dreadnought. In the center stood a pedestal with a glowing orb that seemed to pulse in the dim light. Well, that's ominous, Icarus said, stepping inside. And here I thought we'd left all the creepy glowing things behind. You should know by now that glowing things are never good news, Juno remarked, already poking at the orb to see what secrets it might hold. Lars leaned over, peering at the orb like it might sprout legs and dance. Think it's dangerous? Only one way to find out, Icarus replied, tapping the orb with a fingertip. The room sprang to life. Holographic figures appeared around them, life-sized and animated, caught in the throes of an intense debate. Alien voices filled the chamber, their language a harsh cacophony that made Icarus's ears ring. Looks like we've crashed an alien TED talk, Juno said, watching the figures as they gestured with a fervor that was universal in any species. Any chance of subtitles? Lars asked, eyeing the spectacle like it might explode. Juno tapped away on her wristpad. Give me a minute. Translating alien gibberish isn't exactly a push-button feature. As they watched, the scene unfolded, a council of alien leaders debating a matter of great importance. Slowly, the translation software pieced together their words, the meaning becoming clearer. Wait, Juno said, eyes wide. This isn't just a council meeting. They're planning an invasion. An invasion. Seriously? Icarus looked at her, then back at the holograms. I thought this was supposed to be a mediator ship. It was, Juno replied, her tone grim. But it seems they had bigger plans. The treaty was just a cover. Lars frowned. So they were gonna bring both sides here, get them to agree, then wipe them out and take over. Pretty much, Juno said. And from the looks of it, they had every intention of following through. Well, that's just peachy, Icarus muttered. And here I thought we just found a floating museum. They stood in silence, the implications of the discovery sinking in like a lead weight. If this plan had succeeded, the consequences could have been catastrophic. All right, Icarus said, determination in his voice. We need to get this information out. If there are other ships like this, we have to warn someone. Good luck with that, Juno said dryly, tapping at her wristpad. It's like the ship's jamming our signals. Of course it is, Lars grumbled, because nothing's ever easy. Looks like we're stuck in a sci-fi thriller, Juno said, a humorless laugh escaping her lips. Without the budget for special effects, Icarus added. They tried every trick they knew to bypass the ship's security systems, but every attempt was met with an electronic sneer, as if the Dreadnought itself was mocking their efforts. All right, Plan B, Icarus said, running a hand through his hair. We find the main control room and see if we can shut down the jamming from there. And if we can't, Juno asked, folding her arms. Then we improvise, Icarus replied, already heading for the door. Like always, the journey to the control room was a trek through quiet halls that now felt more like a gauntlet than before. each step weighed with the knowledge of what lay behind them and what could potentially lay ahead. "Does anyone else feel like they're being watched?" Lars muttered, glancing over his shoulder. "Probably just your imagination," Icarus said, though he had to admit the feeling was mutual. "Or the ghosts of double-crossed aliens." "Great," Lars replied. "I'm sure they'll be real understanding." They reached the control room, a vast chamber filled with consoles and screens that flickered with dormant life. Juno got to work immediately, fingers flying over her wristpad as she tried to interface with the ship systems. "Think you can crack it?" Icarus asked, peering over her shoulder. "Eventually," she replied. "But this ain't some weekend coding project, Doc." Lars hovered nearby, muscles tense as if expecting something to leap out at them. "Can't you just unplug it or something?" "Sure," Juno said, rolling her eyes. "And maybe I'll just turn the ship off and back on again while I'm at it." They worked in silence, the room filled with the soft hum of technology and the occasional muttered curse. Icarus paced, the weight of their discovery pressing down on him like the vacuum of space. Finally, Juno let out a triumphant noise. "Got it, I think. Yeah, I've isolated the jammer controls." "Great," Icarus said. "So can you shut it down?" "Already on it," she replied, tapping away with renewed vigor. It took longer than any of them liked, but finally the telltale whine of the jamming field ceased, their communications restored. "Transmit the data," Icarus said, watching as she uploaded their findings to the nearest relay. "Done," Juno said, leaning back with a satisfied smile. "Now let's hope someone's listening." "And if they are not?" Lars asked, ever the optimist. "Then we'll just have to make more noise," Icarus replied, glancing around the room. They stayed a little longer, gathering what they could from the ship's records, the Dreadnought's dark tale adding more layers to the mystery they'd uncovered. The Alien Council's plot was there in stark detail, a chilling reminder of the lengths some would go for power. As they made their way back to the shuttle, Icarus felt a strange sense of closure. They'd uncovered a secret that could have changed the course of history, and now it was out in the universe waiting to be acted upon. "Think they'll believe us?" Lars asked, breaking the contemplative silence. "Probably not," Icarus said. "But that's not our problem, we've done our part." "And what a part it was," Juno said with a grin. "Next time maybe let's just find a nice planet to retire on. You know, with trees and gravity that doesn't try to kill us." "Sounds boring," Lars replied. "Where's the fun in that?" Icarus chuckled. "In space, it's always the quiet ones you have to watch out for." As they left the Dreadnought behind once more, the alien hulk slowly receding into the void, Icarus felt a sense of satisfaction. The universe was still vast and cold, filled with secrets and dangers they could only begin to imagine. But that was the point, wasn't it? The thrill of the unknown, the dance with danger. It was why they kept coming back. And maybe, just maybe, the stars held more stories for them to uncover. Stories of betrayal and courage, of peace and war, all waiting to be found by fools willing to brave the darkness. "To the next adventure," Juno said, raising an imaginary glass. "To the next adventure," Icarus echoed. Lars just shook his head. "You guys are nuts, you know that." "Yeah," Icarus said with a grin. "But we wouldn't have it any other way." With that, they flew off into the starry expanse, ready for whatever the cosmos would throw at them next. Because in the end, it wasn't about the destination. It was about the journey, the long, ridiculous, dangerous journey through the stars. Dr. Icarus Nettle was beginning to think that the universe had a personal grudge against him, or maybe it was just Mondays. Not that it really mattered in space, where every day was as bleak as the next, but somehow the universe found a way to keep the tradition alive. "We need a plan," he announced, standing in the middle of the control room like he had any idea what he was doing. The reality was, he was making it up as he went along, a skill he'd honed to perfection over years of not dying. "How about we just hit the big red button marked off?" Lars suggested, lounging against a console with the kind of casualness that only came from a complete lack of understanding of the situation. Juno snorted, not even pausing in her furious typing at the wristpad. "Sure, Lars. Because every alien warship worth its salt comes with a convenient self-destruct button right next to their intergalactic invasion plans. Can't blame a guy for hoping, Lars shot back. Besides, you're the one who wanted to poke around a glowing orb. You're like a space moth. Juno flipped him a very human gesture of goodwill. And you're like a space cockroach. Persistent and annoyingly hard to get rid of. Enough, Icarus interjected, feeling like a school teacher trying to corral a classroom of unruly kids. We need to disable the security systems. Otherwise, we're not getting out of here without a fight. Great, Lars said. Because the universe knows I've been itching for some exercise. Ignoring Lars, Icarus pulled up the rudimentary schematics they'd managed to salvage from the ship systems. If we can reroute the power from these junctions here, he pointed, we might be able to short-circuit the defense grid. Juno peered over his shoulder, skepticism etched across her face. And by might, you mean there's a non-zero chance we'll blow ourselves up, right? Details, Icarus replied, waving a hand dismissively. Come on, where's your sense of adventure? Left it back on Earth, Juno muttered. With a resigned sigh, the crew set off, navigating the maze-like corridors with the kind of determination that usually landed people in psychiatric care. The ship felt alive around them, the hum of its machinery a constant reminder that they were interlopers in a place they didn't belong. So, what happens if this doesn't work? Lars asked, his voice echoing slightly in the metallic hallway. Then we improvise, Icarus replied, which was code for we run like hell and hope we're faster than whatever's coming after us. Story of my life, Lars muttered. Your life sounds exhausting, Juno said, not looking up from her wristpad as she adjusted the settings, trying to keep them one step ahead of whatever automated nastiness the ship might throw at them. Only when you're around, Lars grinned. The rest of the time it's a breeze. They reached the nearest power junction, a panel of wires and circuits that looked like a particularly angry octopus had mated with a computer. Icarus popped it open with a practiced ease that suggested this wasn't his first time doing technically illegal acts on alien ships. Let's hope this thing doesn't decide to bite back, he said, reaching in and pulling at the wires with the kind of confidence that screamed, I have no idea what I'm doing, but let's pretend I do. Sparks flew, dancing in the air like angry fireflies. Juno leaned in, her eyes flickering over the readouts on her wristpad. Looks like you've managed to temporarily confuse the system, she said, a hint of admiration in her voice. Not bad, Doc. I aim to please, he said, though he knew that even a small victory in space could turn into a monumental setback in a microsecond. Their moment of triumph was short-lived. A low rumble echoed through the corridor, growing louder with each passing second. Icarus exchanged a glance with his crewmates, the unspoken understanding clear. Something was coming, and it wasn't bringing cookies. Drones, Juno hissed, her fingers dancing over her wristpad with a speed that suggested she was auditioning for the role of fastest typer in the galaxy. Lovely, Lars said, unholstering his weapon. Because we didn't have enough fun at the alien invasion meeting. They barely had time to brace themselves before the drones rounded the corner. Sleek and deadly, they hovered in the air, their metallic surfaces glinting like a predator's eyes in the darkness. Stay close to the walls, Icarus instructed, knowing full well that these drones were likely equipped with enough firepower to turn them into space debris. The first volley hit the ground where Lars had been standing a moment before. He dove to the side, cursing under his breath. You said this would be easy, he shouted, returning fire with a few well-placed shots that ricocheted off the drone's armor. No, Juno corrected, her back pressed against the wall as she worked on overriding the drone's systems. He said it might be stupidly dangerous. Same difference, Lars grunted, dodging another blast. Remind me why I hang out with you guys. Because we're the only ones who can tolerate you, Icarus shot back, firing his own weapon and managing to land a hit on one of the drones, sending it spiraling into the wall with a satisfying crunch. Juno let out a triumphant yell. Got one. Their targeting's offline, should give us a fighting chance. The drones hesitated, their movements jerky and less precise. It was enough of a window for the crew to push forward, taking advantage of the confusion to thin the drones' ranks. Maybe we should start a podcast, Lars panted, ducking behind a support beam. How to survive space idiocy. I bet we'd get at least 5 listeners. 6 if you count your mom, Juno quipped, her focus unwavering as she continued to disrupt the drone systems. Hey, my mom would love it, Lars said, firing off another shot. They fought with a determination that bordered on desperation, slowly gaining the upper hand. Icarus felt the adrenaline coursing through him, each shot, each movement a calculated risk in a game that was stacked against them. Finally, the last drone crashed to the floor, sparks flying in its death throes. The silence that followed was almost louder than the battle itself, a testament to their survival against the odds. Icarus wiped his brow, the metallic tang of adrenaline lingering in the air. Well, he said, catching his breath, that was invigorating. I'd give it a solid 5 out of 10, Juno said, her tone as dry as the desert. Too predictable. Lars shook his head, laughing incredulously. You people are insane, certifiable. Yeah, but we're alive, Icarus replied, clapping him on the shoulder. And now we've got a fighting chance to get out of this mess. With the immediate threat neutralized, they regrouped, taking a moment to assess their next steps. The drones were a warning. This ship was more than just a relic. It was a fortress, and one that was determined to keep its secrets buried. All right, Icarus said, his mind racing with possibilities. We need to keep moving. If those drones were a welcoming committee, I'd hate to see what the bouncers look like. Probably something with more teeth, Juno said, already plotting their next move. We need to hit another junction, one that's closer to the core. Great, Lars said, checking his weapon. Because I've always wanted a closer look at alien tech that can kill me in 50 creative ways. Think of it as a learning experience, Icarus said with a grin. Maybe we'll even get a certificate. Yeah, in not dying 101, Lars replied, but there was a spark of determination in his eyes. They were in this mess together, and if they were going to get out, it would be the same way. They set off again, the ship groaning around them like a slumbering giant, unaware of the trespassers within its belly. The corridors twisted and turned, leading them deeper into the labyrinthine interior. This place is like a bad dream, Lars muttered. You think you're getting somewhere, but really you're just running in circles. We're getting somewhere, Juno assured him, though the confidence in her voice was matched only by the uncertainty in her expression. We just have to be smarter than the ship. Great, Lars said. Brains over brawn. Just like the movies. Except we don't have a scriptwriter to bail us out, Icarus said, feeling the weight of their predicament more keenly than ever. As they approached the next junction, the tension ratcheted up a notch. Every creak, every whisper of movement set their nerves on edge. Icarus felt like he was walking a tightrope, each step a gamble that could send them plummeting. Okay, he said once they reached their destination. Let's try this again, shall we? Juno nodded, her fingers already dancing over the controls. I'll see if I can extend the power surge, should knock out more of their defenses. And if it doesn't, Lars asked, though the answer was already written across their faces. We improvise, Icarus replied, a familiar refrain that had become their mantra. With a shared look of determination, they set to work. Icarus could feel the ship resisting, its systems adapting to their interference with an intelligence that was almost sentient. Come on, Juno muttered, her focus intense. Just a little more. The ship shuddered, a low groan reverberating through the walls as if it were protesting their presence. Icarus exchanged a glance with Lars, the unspoken question hanging between them. How much longer could they keep this up? The answer came sooner than expected. A low hum filled the air, building to a crescendo that vibrated through the floor beneath their feet. Guys, Lars said, backing away from the junction. I think we've worn out our welcome. The sound grew louder, a mechanical symphony that promised violence and mayhem. Icarus felt his stomach drop. They had to move, and they had to do it fast. "Time to go," Juno said, not waiting for confirmation as she bolted down the corridor, the others hot on her heels. They ran through the ship, the walls closing in around them like the jaws of a beast. Icarus could hear the hum of more drones on their tail, the ship summoning its defenses to squash the intruders in its midst. "Left, then right," Juno shouted, guiding them through the maze with an instinct that could only be described as borderline psychic. They rounded the corner, the corridor stretching out before them like a promise of freedom. Icarus felt his heart pound, each step a testament to their determination to survive against all odds. "You know," Lars said, his breath coming in ragged gasps, "I'm starting to think we should have just stayed home and watched some vintage sci-fi instead." "Too late for regrets," Icarus replied, forcing his legs to keep moving. "Besides, where's the fun in that?" As they ran, the ship's defenses pursued them, relentless in their quest to remove the human invaders. But the crew was nothing if not resourceful, ducking and weaving their way through the chaos with a dexterity born of necessity. Finally, they reached the shuttle, the familiar sight a beacon of hope in the midst of the carnage. They didn't slow down, barreling inside with the kind of urgency that only came from a very real desire to not die. "Juno, get us out of here," Icarus ordered, collapsing into his seat with a sigh of relief. "With pleasure," she replied, already powering up the engines with a speed that suggested she had no intention of sticking around for an encore performance. The shuttle shuddered as it lifted off, the view of the Dreadnought receding in the viewport. Icarus watched it go, a mixture of relief and lingering tension settling over him. "Well," Lars said, wiping a sheen of sweat from his brow, "that was fun. Let's never do it again." "Agreed," Juno said, though there was a spark of satisfaction in her eyes. Icarus chuckled, exhaustion mingling with the adrenaline still coursing through his veins. "At least we've got a story to tell." "And evidence," Juno added, gesturing to the data still stored on her wristpad. "We might have kicked the hornet's nest, but at least we've got the proof to back it up." "Let's just hope someone's willing to listen," Lars said, his tone more cynical than the shuttle's interior smelled like sweat, old socks, and desperation, not necessarily in that order. The scent of human anxiety was a universal constant, even when you're light years away from anything resembling a spa day. "So this is where we live now?" Lars asked, stretching out on the hard bench, trying to find a position that wouldn't give him scoliosis. "I must have missed the part where misery became our permanent address." "Get comfy," Juno replied, her fingers tapping a rhythm on the wristpad. "We're here until Dr. Nettle finds a way to play God with alien tech." Lars offered a half-hearted laugh, like someone trying to find humor in their last will and testament. "Well, at least we can write home. Tell them we took a vacation in a floating tomb." Icarus Nettle was hunched over a console, his eyes scanning the data like a man searching for the last piece of a puzzle that never made sense to begin with. "I think I've found something," he announced, voice tinged with a mix of hope and dread, like a gambler betting on a one-legged horse. Juno perked up, giving him a sideways glance. "Another death trap or something actually useful?" "Hopefully the latter," Icarus replied, dragging a schematic onto the screen. "Seems there's a weak point in the ship's systems. Might be our ticket out of here." Lars rolled over, groaning. "Great, another suicide mission. We should make t-shirts. I survived alien death traps and all I got was this lousy shirt." "Wouldn't be the worst branding idea," Juno said, not missing a beat. "Could sell them to idiots back home." "Or treasure hunters with a death wish," Icarus added, a faint smile crossing his lips. Now if only we could reach it without ending up as space fertilizer. The truth was, their resources were dwindling faster than a politician's promises. Rations were low, morale even lower. The ship's communication systems were about as useful as a chocolate teapot, and every attempt to send out a distress signal was met with the cold indifference of the void. "I could eat a horse," Lars said, rummaging through their supplies and coming up with a packet of dried something or other. "Shame we're fresh out of space ponies." "Focus," Juno said, though her eyes lingered on the corner of the screen where the rations counter ticked down like a doomsday clock. If Nettle's right, we've got a shot, but we need a plan. Icarus leaned back, rubbing his temples. We'll have to use what we've got. Leverage the ship's systems against itself. Kind of like convincing a bureaucrat to work for free. You mean impossible? Lars asked, raising an eyebrow. Think of it as improbable, Icarus corrected, though the difference was purely academic. The shuttle was quiet, a silence broken only by the hum of the life support systems and the occasional creak of the hull settling into its new home in the middle of nowhere. It was the kind of peace that only came when everyone was too exhausted to argue. So, Lars said after a moment, we're really doing this. Unless you've got a better idea, Juno shot back, fingers still dancing over her wristpad, trying to squeeze every last drop of functionality from the battered device. Not unless you count praying for a miracle, Lars replied, his voice laced with sarcasm. Miracles are for people with better luck, Icarus said, glancing at the alien dreadnought looming in the viewport like a malignant tumor. We deal in reality, and reality sucks, Juno added, punctuating her words with a dry laugh. But hey, at least we're in good company. They settled into an uneasy rhythm, each of them lost in their own thoughts, grappling with the weight of the impossibility before them. The dreadnought was more than just a ship. It was a monument to everything that was wrong with the universe, a reminder that sometimes things don't get better, they just change. Okay, Icarus said, breaking the silence. Here's what we know, the weak point is in the central core. It's the one place we haven't screwed with yet. Probably why it's still a weak point, Juno commented, her tone cynical but her eyes sharp with determination. Exactly, Icarus agreed. But getting there means bypassing a whole lot of defenses. We're talking about a gauntlet of death, destruction, and really bad interior decor. Lars groaned. Couldn't we have found an easier alien ship to rob? Like one that doesn't actively hate us. The universe could always use more miracles, Icarus said with a shrug. But until that unlikely day, we improvise. They spent the next few hours hashing out a plan, a mad scramble of ideas and desperate measures. It was the kind of brainstorming session that would have made a corporate retreat look like a picnic. Juno was in charge of the tech, naturally, her nimble fingers a blur as she manipulated the data, coaxing it into submission with the surety of a seasoned gambler rigging the deck. Lars, for his part, was tasked with keeping an eye on their dwindling supplies, a job that required more optimism than he felt was reasonable. And Icarus. He was the mastermind, the reluctant leader, the guy too stubborn to admit they were screwed. It was a role he neither wanted nor felt qualified for, but when life hands you an alien nightmare, you either step up or get squashed. All right, we've got our plan, Icarus said finally, feeling more like a coach before the big game than a man about to risk life and limb. We hit the core, we hit it hard, and we don't stop until we're free or dead. Preferably not the latter, Lars added, though his grin was more of a grimace. Small details, Juno replied, adjusting her wristpad. With a few hours of rest under their belts and a lot of caffeine in their systems, they set out once more, determined to finish what they'd started. The ship was as hostile as ever, its corridors a maze of foreboding shadows and unseen dangers. This place gets uglier every time we come back, Lars muttered, his voice echoing off the walls. You say that like we have a choice, Icarus replied, scanning the area for any sign of trouble. They moved with purpose, each step a reminder of their precarious situation. The ship seemed to sense their presence, its systems waking up in response to the intrusion. It was like poking a sleeping bear with a stick and hoping it didn't wake up. No drones yet, Juno noted, a hint of surprise in her voice. They're probably saving the best for last, Icarus said, not for a second believing they'd caught a lucky break. They reached the core entrance without incident, a feat that did nothing to calm their frayed nerves. The door loomed before them, an imposing barrier of metal and something that looked like alien hieroglyphs, but was probably just a really bad attempt at art. Okay, Ikaris said, taking a deep breath. This is it. We get in, we do the thing, and we get out. You make it sound so simple, Lars replied, shaking his head. Like we're just going for a walk in the park. Only if the park is full of landmines, Juno added, her wristpad at the ready. They approached the door, each of them acutely aware of the danger that lurked on the other side. Ikaris could feel the adrenaline coursing through his veins, a heady mix of fear and determination. Here goes nothing, he said, signaling Juno to work her magic. With a few deft keystrokes, the door slid open, revealing the core beyond. It was a room like no other, a chaotic mess of circuitry and alien tech that seemed to pulse with a life of its own. Home sweet home, Lars said, sarcasm dripping from every word. Don't get too comfortable, Ikaris replied, stepping inside. The room was a sensory overload, lights flashing in a dizzying array of colors, machines humming with an energy that was both foreign and terrifyingly familiar. Juno wasted no time, diving into the system with a focus that was almost unnerving. Ikaris watched her work, feeling the weight of their survival resting on her shoulders. Got it, she exclaimed, her fingers flying over the controls. I'm in. Now what? Lars asked, glancing nervously at the door. Now we shut this thing down, Ikaris said, his own hands moving to help Juno with the process, each keystroke a step closer to freedom or disaster. The ship groaned in response, a low rumble that made Ikaris's skin crawl. It was a sound that promised retribution, a warning that they were treading on dangerous ground. Feels like we're poking the bear, Lars muttered, his eyes darting around the room. More like kicking it in the teeth, Ikaris replied, his focus unwavering. The systems began to react, their interference triggering alarms and defensive protocols. The room erupted into chaos, the once silent machines now a cacophony of noise and light. Not good, Juno said, her voice barely audible over the din. This thing's fighting back. Then we fight harder, Ikaris replied, a grim determination settling over him. We're not giving up. They pressed on, the room a blur of activity as they struggled to wrest control from the ship's grasp. It was a battle of wills, of technology versus tenacity, and Ikaris was damned if he'd let a heap of alien junk get the better of them. But as the ship continued to resist, another thought gnawed at the edges of his mind. What if they couldn't do it? What if this was the end of the line? Keep going, he urged, refusing to entertain the possibility of failure. Juno nodded, her resolve as strong as his. I'm not stopping now. With a final push, they managed to breach the ship's defenses, leaving the core vulnerable. It was a victory, albeit a small one, and Ikaris felt a surge of hope that had been absent for far too long. All right, he said, his voice steady despite the chaos around them. Now we finish this. The ship shuddered again, a reminder that their time was running out. But for the first time, it felt like they had a fighting chance. And in the depths of space, in this floating monument to despair, that was enough. Doctor, Ikaris Nettle stared at the alien schematic before him, the lines and symbols squiggling like a drunken octopus trying to do advanced calculus. He rubbed his temples, feeling the weight of the universe's collective disdain settling on his shoulders. It wasn't just the dreadnought looming in the viewport like a cosmic middle finger. It was the entire damn cosmos conspiring against him. Why do I feel like we're trying to fix a toaster with instructions in ancient Sumerian? Lars asked, peering over Nettle's shoulder. Because we probably are, Nettle replied, tossing the schematic onto the console. And we're fresh out of Sumerologists. Juno, standing on the other side of the console, was furiously tapping away at her wristpad. I've got something, she announced, her voice tinged with the kind of excitement usually reserved for finding a forgotten chocolate bar at the bottom of a ration pack. Oh, please, do enlighten us, Lars said, laying on the sarcasm as thick as the layer of grime on the shuttle's viewports. Remember that old Earth story, the one about the wooden horse? You mean the one where people got tricked by bad interior design? Lars asked, raising an eyebrow. Exactly, Juno replied. The Trojan horse. We could use that concept. Are you suggesting we build a giant wooden horse in the middle of space? Nettle asked, his voice dripping with skepticism. Because I'm not sure the aliens will fall for it, considering they've never seen a horse. No, genius, Juno shot back, her tone so dry it could have started a fire. I'm suggesting we use the ship's systems against itself, Trojan style. An infiltration from the inside, Lars mused. Like a virus. Exactly, Juno nodded. We exploit a backdoor, trigger a system reset, and reveal whatever's hidden in this heap of junk. Nettle considered this. It was audacious, reckless, and likely to get them all killed. But hell, he'd always been a sucker for impossible odds. All right, he said, a grin forming despite himself. Let's Trojan the hell out of this place. The three of them swung into action like a trio of dysfunctional acrobats, each playing to their strengths, or at least to whatever they claimed to be their strengths during the job interview. Lars started rummaging through their dwindling supplies, looking for anything they could jury-rig into a makeshift Trojan payload. His grumbling filled the shuttle like the soundtrack to a very low-budget horror film. We've got duct tape, some chewing gum, and my last nerve. Not exactly inspiring. We'll make do, Nettle said, trying to sound more confident than he felt. We always do. Juno was already deep diving into the alien system via her wrist pad, her fingers dancing across the interface like a maestro conducting an orchestra of chaos. I've found a weak spot in the ship's defenses, she called out, her eyes glued to the screen. It's like they left the back door open and put up a welcome sign, probably because they never expected three lunatics from the arse end of the galaxy to show up, Lars said, a wry smile tugging at his lips. Let's not disappoint them. The plan, if you could call it that without rolling your eyes, was simple. They'd inject a disruptive code into the ship's central systems, causing a controlled meltdown. With any luck, this would reveal whatever nefarious plot was hiding in the Dreadnought's depths before they all got blown to space dust. All right, Nettle said, squaring his shoulders. We've got one shot at this. No pressure. Just remember, Juno added, her voice laced with that particular brand of humor that came with impending doom. Glowing things are never good news. They worked in a tense silence, the air in the shuttle thick with anticipation and the stench of existential dread. Nettle couldn't help but think of the absurdity of it all. Here they were, three humans trying to outwit an ancient alien war machine with little more than bravado and a serious disregard for self-preservation. Did I ever mention how much I hate space? Lars asked, not looking up from the tangle of wires he was attempting to splice together. Only every single day, Juno replied, her eyes never leaving the screen. I mean, it's just a big empty nothingness, full of things trying to kill you, Lars continued, as if he were giving a TED talk on the subject. Kind of like my last marriage, Nettle quipped, earning him a snort of laughter from Juno. Ready? Juno asked, her finger hovering over the command that would set their plan in motion. A plan that had all the stability of a rickety ladder over a pit of lava. Nettle took a deep breath. Let's do it. Juno tapped the command, and the console lit up like a Christmas tree wired by an electrician with a vendetta. The ship groaned in response, a low rumble that vibrated through the deck plates and up their spines. I think it's working, Juno said, her voice rising with a mix of hope and sheer terror. Define working, Lars muttered, eyeing the flickering lights with suspicion. Because my definition doesn't usually involve imminent explosions. The alien systems began to react, a cacophony of alarms and warnings blaring through the corridors. It was like standing in a hurricane made of sound and fury, signifying everything that could possibly go wrong. Keep at it. Nettle shouted over the din, his hands flying over the controls as he tried to maintain the fragile balance between chaos and catastrophe. The ship bucked and shuddered, angry at their violation. But beneath the noise there was a shift, a subtle change in the way the Dreadnought seemed to breathe, as if it were exhaling a long-held secret. There, Juno cried out, pointing at the display. We've triggered a diagnostic mode. It's like the ship's showing us its dirty laundry. Nettle leaned in, scanning the readouts. Among the technical gibberish and alien script, there was something else, a pattern emerging like a hidden message woven into the fabric of the ship's architecture. "Looks like we've hit the jackpot," Nettle said, his voice tinged with disbelief. "There's a whole section of data here, sealed off and hidden in plain sight." "Bingo," Lars said, grinning despite the chaos. "Now we just need to figure out what the hell it all means." The data was a tangle of encrypted files, each one more labyrinthine than the last. It was like trying to read a novel with all the vowels replaced with obscure punctuation marks. But within that mess lay the key to the ship's secrets, and with it, a potential lifeline. "Keep digging," Nettle urged, watching as Juno navigated the system like a digital archaeologist uncovering an alien Rosetta Stone. With every keystroke, they peeled back another layer, revealing glimpses of the truth buried within the Dreadnought's core. There were alliances, betrayal, and hidden technologies, pieces of a puzzle that painted a picture of interstellar intrigue and impending doom. "This is it," Juno said, her voice a mix of triumph and exhaustion. "We've found evidence of an invasion plot. It's all here, coordinates, timelines, everything." Nettle felt a thrill of vindication, tempered by the realization of what they'd uncovered. The Dreadnought wasn't just a relic, it was a weapon poised to unleash chaos across the galaxy. "Now we just need to get this information out," Lars said, his expression serious for once, "before the ship decides to have us for breakfast." "Right," Nettle agreed, his mind racing with possibilities. "We'll transmit everything back to the shuttle, then set the core to self-destruct. We can't let this thing fall into the wrong hands, or any hands for that matter." They worked quickly, transferring the data to their shuttle systems while setting the ship's core to overload. It was a race against time, the ship's systems growing increasingly unstable with each passing second. "Got it," Juno exclaimed, her fingers flying over the controls with a speed born of desperation. "Good," Nettle said, his heart pounding in his chest. "Now let's blow this thing and get the hell out of here." They sprinted for the exit, the ship's alarms wailing like a chorus of banshees heralding their doom. The corridors seemed to close in around them, a gauntlet of hostile architecture intent on keeping them from escape. "Why do these places never have a straightforward exit?" Lars griped, his breath coming in ragged gasps. "Probably because they weren't designed by people who wanted you to leave," Juno replied, her voice strained. They reached the shuttle just as the ship began to shake in earnest, the core's impending detonation sending tremors through the Dreadnought's superstructure. "Strap in," Nettle barked, slamming the shuttle's hatch shut behind them. "This is gonna be rough." Lars slid into the pilot's seat, his hands flying over the controls as he brought the shuttle's systems online. The engines roared to life, drowning out the sound of the ship's dying groans. "Hold on to your butts," Lars said, his voice a mix of excitement and sheer terror. The shuttle shot forward, streaking through the corridors and out into the void of space, leaving the Dreadnought behind as it began to collapse in on itself like a dying star. As they cleared the blast radius, the Dreadnought erupted in a brilliant explosion, a cascade of energy and debris that lit up the darkness like a macabre firework display. "Well," Lars said, his voice tinged with satisfaction. "That's one way to make an exit." Nettle slumped back in his seat, the adrenaline draining from his veins like water down a plug hole. "We did it," he said, unable to keep the relief from his voice. "I can't believe we actually did it." "Believe it," Juno replied, a weary grin on her face. "Now let's get the hell out of here before anything else decides to explode." The shuttle soared into the unknown, leaving behind the wreckage of their latest adventure. And though they were battered and bruised, they carried with them the knowledge that, for once, they'd come out on top. In the cold, uncaring expanse of space, that was enough to make them feel invincible. The shuttle's cramped interior felt even more claustrophobic with the weight of their recent victory. The hum of the engines was the only sound, a soothing lullaby after the cacophony of alarms that had chased them out of the Dreadnought. Lars piloted with the same reckless abandon that had gotten them into this mess in the first place, the controls responding to his touch like an old lover with a grudge. Juno sat hunched over her wristpad, her eyes darting across the holographic display. She looked like she was playing the world's deadliest game of solitaire. "All right, transmitting data to our friends at the Galactic Coalition now," she announced, tapping a sequence that sent their hard-won intel hurtling through the void. "Let's hope they're not on a coffee break," Lars muttered, his eyes darting between the controls and the growing speck of the Dreadnought in the rear view. Nettle leaned back, trying to ignore the suspicious creaking noises emanating from somewhere under his seat. "I'm sure they'll get right on it, between bouts of filing paperwork and contemplating their navels," Juno snorted. "Well, I'm sure the invasion of the century memo might get a bit more than a cursory glance." Their triumph was still settling in, a heady mix of relief and disbelief. It felt like they'd somehow managed to win an interstellar lottery, the prize being not getting vaporized. "Do you think they'll believe us?" Lars asked, steering the shuttle through a field of space debris that looked suspiciously like their previous year's tax returns. "Believe a ragtag bunch of misfits who stumbled upon an alien conspiracy. What's not to believe?" Nettle replied, his sarcasm as thick as the tension in the shuttle. "I'm sure they'll roll out the red carpet. Or at least the red tape." Juno's wristpad chimed and she glanced at the message with a feral grin. "Transmission confirmed. Our allies now have the evidence and the proverbial cat is out of the bag." "Let's hope it doesn't get run over by the proverbial truck," Lars added, the flicker of anxiety in his voice giving his bravado a slight wobble. "Knowing our luck, Lady Luck's probably driving that truck," Nettle deadpanned. The Dreadnought, now little more than a blot on the distant horizon, had quieted to a sullen silence. It seemed less like a world-ending doom machine and more like a very angry toaster. "Now that we've played the Good Samaritans and saved the day," Juno said, "what's next?" "Drinks at the nearest spaceport first," Nettle said. "We wait for the cavalry to arrive and mop up the mess. And then we drown our sorrows in the cheapest swill credits can buy," Lars said, his tone brightening at the prospect. "Assuming our allies don't decide to throw us to the wolves for funsies." Nettle caught a glimpse of himself in the cracked, grimy mirror that someone thought was a good idea to install in the shuttle, probably to compound their misery at seeing their own drawn faces. His reflection looked haunted, but there was a new edge of determination. He turned to his companions. "We did good. But let's not kid ourselves, this is just the beginning. The galaxy's full of big bad things ready to bite us on the arse." "A toast to that," Lars said, raising an imaginary glass. "To biting back." The ship's comms crackled to life, a voice breaking through the static. "Unidentified shuttle, this is Celtic Wolf of the Galactic Coalition. We've received your transmission. Please state your intentions." Juno leaned forward, her tone dripping with feigned innocence. "Our intentions? Well, not getting blown up would be a start." Nettle shot her a look of warning. "This is Dr. Icarus Nettle. We're returning from an exploratory mission. We have critical intel on an impending invasion, requesting safe passage and clearance for a debrief." There was a pause, the kind that stretched into awkward eternity. Finally the voice returned, this time with a hint of grudging respect. "Understood, Dr. Nettle. Maintain your current course and prepare for escort." And good work out there, we're being escorted," Lars said, incredulous. "Did hell freeze over while we were running for our lives? Maybe they're just making sure we don't crash into anything important," Juno suggested, ever the pragmatist. "Or they're planning to arrest us in style," Nettle said, his voice wry. As promised, a fleet of coalition ships appeared on the radar, sleek and imposing, their hulls gleaming with the kind of polish that spoke of both superiority and boredom. They flanked the shuttle like a school of sharks around a particularly unappetizing bit of flotsam. "Look at these guys," Lars said, eyeing the formation with grudging admiration. "I bet their ships don't smell like a gym locker. Or like desperation and poor life choices, Juno added, her gaze lingering on the coalition insignia. Can't help but feel like the ugly duckling at the ball, Nettle muttered. The escort guided them to the coalition flagship, a looming monolith that made the Dreadnought look like a kid's toy. They docked with all the grace of a toddler learning to walk, the shuttle groaning in protest as it settled awkwardly into the docking bay. The hatch opened with a reluctant hiss, and they were greeted by a squad of coalition personnel whose expressions ranged from curious to deeply unimpressed. "Welcome aboard," said a woman with the kind of sharp features that suggested she could cut glass with a glare. "I'm Commander Ilara Kalem." "You must be the heroes of the Ior." Lars gave a theatrical bow, as if he just stepped off the set of a terribly written space opera. "Heroes? Us? We're just the idiots who didn't die." Commander Kalem's lip twitched, the barest hint of amusement breaking through her stern facade. "Follow me. We have some questions." They were led through the immaculate corridors of the flagship, a stark contrast to their own battered vessel. The air was clean, the floors gleaming, the whole place practically oozing with efficiency. It made Nettle want to smear fingerprints on everything out of sheer spite. In the briefing room, they were met with a gaggle of officers, all with expressions that suggested they smelled something unpleasant, probably the sweat and singed dignity the trio had brought on board. "Doctor." "Nettle, Juno, Lars," Kalem began, "we've reviewed the data you transmitted. If it's accurate, you've potentially saved a lot of lives if—" Juno interjected, crossing her arms. "We risked our necks for that intel. It's as accurate as it gets." Nettle stepped in before Juno decided to declare war on their supposed allies. "What she means is, yes, the intel is legitimate. We suggest cross-referencing it with your own findings, but we're confident in what we uncovered." An officer with the kind of face best suited for scowling leaned forward. "And what exactly do you expect in return?" Lars leaned back, a lazy grin spreading across his face. "A parade would be nice. Maybe a statue. But failing that, not being thrown in the brig sounds good." Kalem's gaze swept over them, assessing, calculating. "Your cooperation will be noted," she said finally, her tone non-committal enough that it could mean anything from medals to a cozy cell. "Noted." "Great," Nettle said, his voice dry. "We'll just frame that and hang it up in our imaginary trophy room." As the briefing continued, the crew found themselves answering a barrage of questions, each more tedious than the last. They recounted their harrowing adventure, embellishing only slightly for dramatic effect. "And then, as we were about to be vaporized by the self-destruct sequence," Lars said, gesturing wildly, "we made our daring escape." Kalem's expression suggested she was less than impressed by the theatrics. "And this supposed invasion fleet, how soon until they arrive?" Juno shrugged, her nonchalance bordering on reckless. "Hard to say. These things usually don't come with a timetable, which is why you'll want to keep a close eye on those coordinates we sent," Nettle added, his voice firm. "This is bigger than us. It's bigger than any one system." There was a murmur of agreement among the officers, a ripple of unease spreading through the room. It seemed that, against all odds, they'd actually managed to convince the powers that be to take them seriously. The debriefing ended with a promise of further investigation, and the trio was escorted back to their shuttle, the atmosphere heavy with unspoken tension. "Well, that was fun," Lars said, his voice dripping with irony. "Next time, let's just take up knitting. Knitting would be less dangerous." Juno agreed, her eyes scanning the sleek ships around them as they prepared to depart. As they settled back into their seats, Nettle allowed himself a small smile. "We did it, folks. We got the word out." "Yeah," Lars said, his gaze distant as he looked out at the stars. "Now it's up to them not to screw it up." The shuttle disengaged from the flagship, once more embracing the cold embrace of space. As they drifted away, they were acutely aware of the enormity of what lay ahead. But for now, they had done their part. They had faced down a cosmic threat, survived against impossible odds, and proven that even in the vast, uncaring expanse of the galaxy, a few determined souls could make a difference. Who knew saving the universe could be so exhausting? Juno said, her voice a mix of relief and disbelief. Yeah, Nettle replied, his tone weary but content. But at least we'll have one hell of a story to tell. The shuttle's engines thrummed to life, carrying them away from the Coalition fleet and back into the unknown. And as they sailed through the darkness, they couldn't help but feel a sense of quiet triumph. In the end, they were just three humans in a universe that often treated them like ants under a magnifying glass. But that didn't matter. They might be the small, scrappy underdogs of the galaxy, but damn it, they'd shown that they could bite back. And sometimes that was enough. The shuttle coasted through space, solitude hanging like a thick fog. Inside, the smells of sweat and scorched metal mingled, painting a vivid picture of their recent narrow escape. Dr. Icarus Nettle, the resident scientist, leaned back in his seat, pondering the events that had catapulted them from ragtag explorers to reluctant heroes. Can you believe it? Lars piped up, breaking the silence with his trademark incredulity. They actually bought our story. Must be desperate if they're pinning their hopes on us. Well, Juno chimed in, tapping at her wristpad, considering most of the galaxies inhabited by folks who'd sell their mothers for a quick buck were practically saints. Saints. Nettle snorted, scrubbing a hand through his disheveled hair. Maybe in a world where the patron saint is blessed Saint Skepticism, or Saint Bullshit, Lars added with a grin. We should get halos made of duct tape. The conversation lulled, the weight of what lay ahead settling over them like a heavy blanket. Their transmission had set off a chain reaction of political fallout, each faction scrambling to realign itself in the wake of imminent threat. Treaties were crumbling faster than a cheap cracker, and the diplomatic dance had turned into a messy fistfight. You think they'll actually do anything with the intel? Juno asked, pushing a stray lock of hair behind her ear. If they've got half a brain, they will, Nettle replied, his voice tinged with cynicism. Though brains do seem to be in short supply. Hey, at least we did our part, Lars said, ever the optimist in their trio of cynics. If the galaxy wants to go belly up, that's their problem, true, Nettle conceded. Though I was kinda hoping for a little more saving the universe and a little less hurling ourselves into the abyss. Think of it this way, Juno countered, her voice laced with sardonic cheer. We're like intergalactic canaries. If we croak, the rest get a heads up. Ah yes, the noble canary, Lars intoned, adopting a mock-serious expression. Hero of space. Their banter was a lifeline, a way to keep the creeping existential dread at bay. The Coalition had hailed them as heroes, but to Nettle, it felt more like being the least repugnant option at a banquet of doom. They drifted on, the stars outside pinpricks of light in the infinite void. Nettle occupied his mind by replaying their encounter with the Dreadnought, a hulking beast of a ship, its corridors echoing with the ghosts of its creators. It had been a touch and go, a game of cat and mouse with an artificial intelligence that seemed more interested in playing games than annihilating them outright. Remember when we thought space was full of adventure? Lars mused, breaking Nettle's reverie. Yeah, Juno replied, her voice dry. Turns out it's mostly full of ways to die, and really bad food, Nettle added, glancing at the nutrient paste they'd been subsisting on. I'd kill for a burger. Let's just hope we're not on the menu, Lars quipped. I doubt we'd taste good anyway. Their chatter was interrupted by a crackle from the comms, a familiar voice breaking through the static. Unidentified shuttle, please confirm your destination. Nettle rolled his eyes. We're the same unidentified shuttle you escorted 10 minutes ago, he said, leaning toward the mic. Headed to the nearest spaceport for some well-earned R&R. Copy that, came the reply. Proceed at your discretion. Discretion, Lars repeated, shaking his head. Funny word for a bunch of lunatics like us. Yeah. Well, discretion doesn't pay the bills, Juno remarked, returning her attention to the wristpad. But maybe it'll keep us from getting shot at for a while. The spaceport loomed ahead, a haphazard collection of modules and docking bays clinging to an asteroid like barnacles to a whale. It wasn't pretty, but it was home, at least until fate decided to shove them elsewhere. As they prepared to dock, Nettle's thoughts drifted back to the Coalition and their oh-so-generous gratitude. Despite their heroic status, he couldn't shake the feeling that they were being used as pawns in a much larger game. "You think we'll get a statue?" Lars asked, bringing Nettle back to the present. "Huh," Nettle barked a laugh. "Only if it's made of something cheap and ugly, tin foil," Juno suggested. "Cardboard," Lars countered, grinning. "Maybe with a layer of duct tape for authenticity." The docking completed with a shuddering thud, a testament to the shuttle's worn-out systems. The hatch opened, spilling them onto the bustling concourse of the spaceport. The air was thick with the scent of too many bodies crammed into too small a space, a mix of sweat, oil, and desperation. "Ah, home sweet home," Juno said, wrinkling her nose. The trio made their way through the throng, dodging harried technicians and irate traders. The spaceport was a crossroads for every kind of riffraff the galaxy had to offer, and they fit right in. "First stop," Lars announced, eyeing the neon signs of a nearby bar. "Drinks. Because if I have to think about treaties and invasions sober, I'll lose my mind." "Agreed," Nettle said. "We've earned a little liquid courage." They settled into a booth, the seats patched and repatched with duct tape, and ordered the cheapest swill on the menu. It tasted like disappointment with a hint of motor oil, but it was better than nothing. "To us," Juno said, raising her glass. "The galaxy's favorite underdogs. May we always land on our feet," Lars added, clinking his glass against hers. "And may we never run out of duct tape," Nettle finished, taking a long swig. They drank in companionable silence, the weight of their recent adventure slowly lifting. Around them the bar filled with the raucous sounds of laughter and argument, life going on despite the looming threat. "Think they'll actually patch things up?" Lars asked, gesturing vaguely with his glass. "The Coalition, I mean. Who knows?" Juno replied. "Politics is just as messy as the rest of the universe. Probably worse. But we did what we could," Nettle said, his voice firm. "The rest is up to them. Here's hoping they don't screw it up," Lars said, draining his glass. "But if they do, at least we've got front row seats." Their laughter mingled with the noise of the bar, a small beacon of hope and defiance in the sprawling chaos of the cosmos. They might be small fish in an ocean of sharks, but they'd proven they could swim with the best of them. And as they sat there, basking in the dubious glory of their accomplishments, they knew one thing for certain: whatever came next, they'd face it together. The galaxy might be a dark, dangerous place, but with a little luck and a lot of duct tape, they'd carve their own path through the stars. And if the universe wasn't ready for them, well, that was the universe's problem.